Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for Webinar Wednesday. My name is Dr. Hilda Billups, and I currently serve as the director of the Webinars Committee for TACUSPA. You'll notice we have changed the format for this webinar just a bit. This webinar is a book club meeting. We're reading the book Cultivating Trauma-Informed Practice in Student Affairs by Dr. Tricia Shalka. We'll be discussing Chapter 4, Personal Practices for Trauma-Informed Student Affairs Work. Allow me to introduce our facilitator for today's book club discussion, Josh Meredith. Josh joins us from the University of South Alabama in Mobile, Alabama, but he started his higher education career in Texas as Director of Student Life at South Plains College in Levelland, Texas. He is now at South Alabama serving as Associate Director of Student Activities, an opportunity he found through his TACUSPA network after getting involved with the association. He was selected as a 2023 Thomas Moorman Fellow and served as chair of the Webinars Committee from 2023 to 2024. I am grateful to Josh for his leadership of the Webinars Committee. He handed over to me a rich collection of resources and materials, which has made my work as the director much easier. Josh has both an undergraduate degree in business management as well as a master's degree in higher education and student development from Taylor University. Though he now resides in Mobile, Josh originally is a Hoosier from the state of Indiana. In his free time, he enjoys running, spending time with friends, and reading a good book. We're very excited to have Josh serve as our facilitator for this book club discussion, and are thankful to each of you for your presence and willingness to share. I will now turn the webinar over to Josh.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And I will say, I have to give a shout out to, while it's not my alma mater, those Indiana Hoosiers are having a pretty good football season, if I do say so myself. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. I'm really excited because I think of the 4 chapters we've read so far, this one was my favorite. It was more boots on the ground, like what does it really mean? What does it mean? How do we taking all this information we're learning and what do we do moving forward? And so, since this is being recorded for the folks who might pop in and watch us on YouTube, I'm going to give just a very, very brief overview of what we've covered so far. So, chapter 1 covered what is trauma and like the definitions of trauma and what trauma is not. It covered sources of trauma and potentially traumatic experiences, potential responses and possible responses to trauma, and how uh, our inability to maybe receive individual stories can be isolating in the effects of for survivors. Discussed the multidimensionality of the traumatic experience. The author said, the reality, however, is that regardless of whether the origins of trauma may be physical or psychological, the ripples of trauma are multidimensional and impact us at numerous levels of experience simultaneously, including the cellular, physical, psychological, relational, communal, and spiritual. And I thought that quote really ties into what we're going to talk about here in chapter 4. Chapter 2 covered what might it be like for a college student to experience trauma. Discussion of empathy, and not just being able to imagine someone's experience, quote, but actually listening to the survivor's experience and believing it. Discussing how the author discussed our inability to listen to survivor stories. Quote, if it can't be heard, it can't be believed. Let's see. I'm going through my notes here. I apologize. There was a discussion of external forces of privilege and oppression, social discourse. So you experienced X, and here's what our societal narrative is about X, how that can affect our perceptions of trauma or experiences of trauma. Social constructs of identity. So the author gave the example of cisgendered men, fear of being perceived as weak, and how those social constructs of identity can be limiting and your ability to be honest and truthful and share your story as a survivor. And then the author discussed how trauma changes everything, that the 4 domains of identity, relationships, environment, belonging. The author concludes, the most fundamental work remains that of learning to attune ourselves to considering, quote, and this is what they go back to in chapter 4, what else might be going on for those with whom we interact. Chapter 3 gets to the point of what does it mean to be trauma informed? The author warns of neutrality and how our environment and culture can lead to re-traumatization or worse, new traumas. Uh, the author defines trauma-informed practice as, quote, taking knowledge about trauma to directly inform and shape our policies and practices. Gives an overview of different approaches, SAMHSA, Alex Chevron, Vinay's equity-centered trauma, and then the author gives her own model that says a student affairs focused uh, model of trauma-informed practice is holistic, power-conscious, focused on relationships, committed to knowledge building, it's harm reducing, and it's committed to wellness-centered decision-making and practice. And so moving from that to chapter 4, there's a lot in chapter 4. The author starts with the discussion of ways of being and how we carry ourselves in the world. The author said, I miss opportunities to see trauma under the surface and I do harm in the process. So, discussing being grounded and leading with compassion and grace. The author discusses 3 different ways of being, of nurturing a sense of humanness, seeing those impacted by trauma as whole beings, and holding on to holism. Uh, and the third way of being was arriving with compassionate curiosity and going back to that question, what else might be going on? The author discusses developing knowledge and skills. Um, Often, I think it is less about administrators, and this I related to, administrators and faculty intentionally trying to invalidate a student's experience as much as not having the knowledge and tools and understanding what is happening. Or perhaps it happens because faculty and administrators are stretched too thin and have to move too quickly as a result. The author discusses ways of being as starting points to discuss secondary traumatic stress, self-care, limitations of self-care, and then SOS self-care of those of us who lead with care and tend to push through because we got to take care of those students. There's a lot here. But I want to know for y'all, for those who read it, or maybe just from my brief overview, what resonated with you the most from chapter 4?
I'll go first. Hi, Josh.
Hey, hello, welcome back. Also, I forgot to say
Thanks.
hi, so hello.
Oh, of course. Thank you so much. I think what resonated with me the most about this chapter is avoiding assumptions
Mm,
when, especially with student behaviors. Um, how we feel dictates our behaviors, and it's not always something that is obvious to us when we see them, not showing up to class, maybe not engaging in the course itself. And so, you know, we we try to do our best as educators to not make assumptions and give students a label. And I think that by being self-aware, we kind of look at things from different angles. Could there be other factors that are associated with this type of trauma that a student could be experiencing? And so it's something for me to really look into more myself and just kind of really take the time to listen to students a little bit more and see
mhm.
what they want to share and how I can help them.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody else want to share what stood out to them from this chapter?
Sure, I can go. Um, there was a quote for me, it was on page 66, that was about having that kind of savior logic that as people who work in student success, we tend to want to be problem solvers. So when someone comes in, they're like doing the work of unpacking what their trauma is, and they're being brave and letting us know this is what has happened to me. This is what my experience is. It's automatic for us to be like, okay, and here are things that you can do about that. And that's not what that person needs in that moment. And it's hard to turn that part of your brain off, to turn that part of your job or your personality off and just be there as another human being with someone who is opening up to you. And it can be hard to know like when is someone maybe seeking advice and not saying, I need help with this, and when is someone just letting you know what has happened to them, and it can be hard to find those boundaries.
Yeah, I think a theme to me from that was like presence of can we just be present and not move to always solve or always fix? Yeah, definitely. Anybody else? Maybe one more? You want to share what stood out to them from this chapter?
I did. Same idea. I'm a question asker, and I have to stop myself quite a bit because a student will say something like after um, one of the Cardinal Community sections, that the freshman transition mentor program we have. Um, a student started talking to me and talking about her issues with school. And I started asking her questions. And then I realized I was like, shut up, Marla, just shut up and listen to her. Um, if she's having a hard time getting it out, then we'll ask questions. But otherwise, let's just stand here and listen to her. So, because I'm nosy. Not nosy. Well, yeah, yeah.
And
Like, let
sometimes
me
it's like
help
the
you. Let's
unsaid
fix it.
thing, and you want them to get to that unsaid thing, but sometimes they just need you to
Let them
there.
get there
Yeah.
first. Yeah.
Yeah, there was a quote I wrote down said the way we show up for others is the backbone of this work. And so I think for me that resonated with even recently, like my students have, I don't know, end of year stress. They're also trying to like do those end of year events and plan for January. And there's a few different stressors. There's been some interpersonal things, and so and so rolled their eyes, and so and so. And I think getting back to just like, okay, letting them have that space to talk it out. And then what really resonated with me was that what else might be going on, of just coming back to that and not just framing myself, but how do I bring that into conversations with students? Okay, so and so did X, Y, and Z, and it's maybe a little triggering for you, or it really sets you off. What else might be going on? Maybe they have final exams. Maybe they're going through a breakup. We don't know. So um, okay, there was a question that the author opens with. So we'll kind of walk through this, and if we can take this conversation wherever. So this is a book club. Feel free to speak up and share. But I've got a few questions we'll just toss out and then see where it goes. So, um, and I'll frame this with, for me, reading through this, I'm constantly evaluating like, oh, that recent scenario, oh, that recent interaction, or oh, this scenario from earlier in the semester, seeing it through a new lens. So the question the author opens with, and this was page 60, how do the ways I move through the world impact those around me who have survived trauma, including myself, if applicable? So for you all, in thinking through this chapter, how are the ways you move through your interactions with students, through your day-to-day work life? What came to mind when you read that question?
I
I'll go ahead
think,
and go.
oh,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. You go
You can go,
first.
Queen.
Okay, I'll go. So, um, it's interesting because it's hard for me to describe. It's like if you've ever seen a film or a TV episode where it's like you're just standing still and then you see all these people moving around you and you see like, day becomes night and everything's just kind of passing you by, but someone maybe who has experienced trauma, they're just stuck in that specific time and in that moment. And so how you move through the world as someone who maybe hasn't experienced trauma or you just aren't aware that you have experienced it. It's like it could be a day to day, just you're doing your regular things, you're kind of going about your business. And then there's like that moment where you realize, oh, this probably wasn't something that I anticipated. And now it's affecting my day to day routine. And maybe the world kind of gets slower. The ways in which you think about how you're doing your day to day things it feels different. How you make decisions affects, what can come about in your future, long-term effects. And so I know that doesn't quite answer the question, but it's it's really just seeing how is everything else moving as if you are the person who has experienced trauma, and what do you do with that?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Emily, I think you also had something that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just being aware of how I'm coming off towards others because I think like especially when I was an elementary school teacher, I mean all your students are different whether they're second grade or 22. They're all different, but they all have the same needs, which is to be understood and to be heard. And I think it's super important to remember that throughout our jobs because yes, we work with students and but like we're employing them to be student employees. So we have a different level of expectations for them. But we also have to remember that they are still students and they are still young adults. Like their frontal lobe is not fully developed. And I think it's really important to remember that and remember that they're still growing and show them grace when we're perhaps frustrated with them not responding or not engaging or doing the typical student things. I think it's important to remember that they're not grown in the way that we are and they're still developing and learning and to treat them with that grace while still holding them accountable. I think that's really important because I've seen teachers and staff here not be doing that in the same way, not in our department though. Mm-mm, others. And I've seen them just be really harsh on students. And I think, especially in the day and age we're in right now, holding people accountable while still being kind and respectful is super, super important, especially these young adults where it's like their first job. So I'm trying to keep that in the forefront of my mind and remember to give them grace, but also reminding them to like pour into themselves because I know that when I was in college, I would go way too hard, but not on the things that I needed to. And then I would burn out. So I just want to make sure that my student mentors, my workers are pouring into themselves and taking care of themselves and not just constantly giving to everyone else. So I think those are, for me, that's what I took from it.
Anybody else have anything that comes to mind? How do the ways I move through the world impact those around me who have survived trauma? Or any other thoughts related to what's been brought up so far? Okay, if not, we'll move on. So the author, this is starting on page 62, starts with the kind of covers three different ways of being. And we start with way of being number one, nurturing a sense of humanness. And yeah, the author goes into and this kind of gets deeper into another it can get to another conversation. But we're routinely in systems of limited resources in higher education and sometimes a perceived competition for limited resources. Scarcity mindsets make it easier to bear down in protecting who and what we perceive to be our own. And then makes the second point, systems of oppression implicitly and explicitly shape our actions and interactions in higher education environment. So, without, yeah, throwing your employer or your department under the bus, um, I guess, what are some ways that you see limiting to bring that full sense of humanness into your work? Or maybe we could talk about it in higher education broadly. Um, what are some of those limitations you all have seen?
I think that some of those limitations, um, especially in more recent months, it's like whatever resources we have had, we have to kind of reevaluate those, not just because of limits of, who all we can staff and what all there is, tools and things like that, and funding. But there's almost this sense of like, um, there's some politics to it, if I may. So like, when you have maybe an area where students live on campus or just the community, And there tends to be like a high rate of, maybe STIs or something like that. That's a thing that happens. And so, you have a health center. And if this health center is able to sustain the resources that it can, then, students can find that support. But if there are cutbacks, if there are budget cuts, if there's limited staff, then it becomes an issue. And so, we as educators in our respective roles are thinking, well, we can still refer them to this, but we also have to be mindful in that it may not always be convenient. Like there might be some steps that they have to take to get that type of care that they need. And then for mental health resources as well, I mean, that's an ongoing concern with the mental health crisis among our students. And, are there available resources for them to seek out? And in a way, there is, but at the same time, we also have to just communicate that in a way of, are we aware if there are tons and tons of resources, but if not, how do we let them know that without shying away and giving them that sense like, oh, it's just hopeless and we don't know what to do.
That's a hard balance. I'm like just reading the next section of like I got little red underlines that for me felt aspirational. Like, man, I wish I could embody that every day. But our first task in trauma-informed way of being is to nurture a humanizing stance, seeing in others, uh, we see others as doing their best to achieve their goals. We see in others a desire for meaning and fulfillment. We see our colleagues and students as fulfill the same mixture of fears and dreams, strengths and stumbles. So I guess kind of going off of what you just said, like how do you navigate those environments with limited resources or with limited, you know, access to solutions or help the students while also still nurturing that sense of humanness?
That's tough.
I don't have an
Yeah.
answer.
Right? Like that's tough.
Let me wave my magic wand.
Right? Well, it's all sometimes we talk about safe spaces that like that would be one. Um, we don't teach necessarily, so we're not instructors. So there's not really like a class necessarily that we can kind of harbor that safe environment, but we do have a space, if you will, on campus. We have our offices. um, we know where to walk to where they are requesting said service. And that kind of tends to be that navigation part of it, but then the navigation of, communication channels. How do you kind of follow up? Is it necessary? Is it appropriate? Or is it just kind of like how Delana mentioned earlier, like, are they just wanting you to listen and not kind of provide those solutions? Well, you're there to kind of let them come in, have them talk about what's going on, and then you respond accordingly.
Anybody else, anything to add on? Um, yeah, I love the conclusion of that section from I guess one also talking about Dr. King's beloved community, one where we recognize our mutual humanity to the point we're unable to accept the suffering of others in any form. We become unwilling to leave anyone behind. It doesn't mean that we no longer hold people accountable or that conflicts no longer arise, but we're committed to resolving conflicts with one another through love and nonviolence. And at the end, from that nonviolent, humanizing stance, we can hold one another and ourselves with grace and honor in our shared humanity. I just thought, man, this is so beautiful and aspirational and challenging, like all wrapped up in one. So the second way of being was seeing those impacted by trauma as whole beings and um, challenges the deficit-based mindset that, oh, because you've experienced X, Y, and Z, now you can't, or um, that deficit lens, and then kind of counteracts that with this uh, definition from Gainwright, I think it was, um, suggesting that we expand and build beyond deficit-focused, trauma-informed practice, instead um, to instead a holistic mindset and approach focused on healing-centered engagement. So, um, I want to know for y'all, like, what was challenging for you? How have you, you know, how have you seen it done well moving in practice, moving from a deficit mindset to kind of that holistic, healing-centered engagement mindset?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
Yeah, so kind of those two, t starting with deficit mindset and challenging, the reader to move towards a, asset base of like, you're not less than because of your trauma. Um, yeah, I guess the question can go multiple ways. How have you seen it done well, or how do you feel challenged to, I guess, move forward, moving from a deficit-based mindset towards a more holistic mindset?
I think it's just super important to focus on the student and the person as a whole and not just specific parts of them, like what their strengths or weaknesses are, but to really focus on them as a whole student and think about not just academics, but also mental health and also extracurriculars. You're thinking about them in all the ways, not just the way that affects you as like their employer or something like that. Because they're a whole person and they have a lot going on in college. So it's really important to make sure that you're helping them succeed in all aspects, not just the aspect that like you think is important. And I think that that's hard as like teachers, educators, whatever, because we're so focused on what we're being told to focus on from our higher ups. But we have to remember that these students are still students and they're still like young people, and we have to ensure that they are okay because every student is different, every background history is different, and they all need different things. But if we focus on being respectful, kind, and helpful, that's like the foundation, in my opinion, that there needs to be. So, yeah.
So I'm gonna, I guess, pivot into this third one because I have some notes written down here. Um, it also says we can slow down, listen, observe, and ask what might be going on. Um, do you think that challenge is, um, would you say the pressure from above to like keep work moving forward is greater than, I'm trying to think of how to word this question.
Is
You'd
greater
mentioned the
than like
pressure
what they
from
need.
administration, but like what kind of barrier do you think that is, or how do you navigate that?
I think that in my old profession as an elementary school teacher, the pressure from the higher ups and especially from TEA, so like the the government, that definitely was a big barrier. But I think that now that I'm in higher education and at a university that really cares about their students, it is different. And I think it's different when you have the freedom that we have in higher education. When you're in, K through 12, you are focusing on one class, one thing, and you are completely responsible in their mind for, 20, 30, however many student successes. But in this position, you're helping students as a whole and helping them succeed, and you're not being told like you have to have them hit this or do that or whatever. I'm sure in other departments, yes, but I think we're really lucky because we are in a department that truly focuses on student success in all areas. And something that Ashley and I've talked about is remembering that they are students first, and like workers second, because they are still students and people, and we want to make sure to cater to that and what they need. So that's my opinion, is it's a lot easier here to focus on them as a whole than it was in public education, but other people could feel differently.
I wanted to jump off of what Emily just said with like thinking them as students first and employees second is we also have to remember that they're not just students first, they're people first and students second and then employees third. But more likely they are people first and then like family members second. And so it's like we are really much further down on this totem pole than we think about just because like this is what my life looks like and therefore this is what everyone's life looks like that I encounter on a day-to-day basis, and that's not true. And especially with the students who are figuring out who they are and what their goals are, and if they're dealing with trauma, how are they going to get to that space, and what they need from us. So remembering that just because this is what our priority is right now, or what the university is saying the priority needs to be, doesn't mean that for this individual student who like this is a small part of what their life is. Um, and so our job can't overshadow this individual and what this individual needs from us in that moment. There will be other days, um, other students who are able to fulfill this need, or other employees that will be able to fulfill this need, but this one person needs this one thing from me now, and that's what my job is today.
So how do you embody that compassionate curiosity? This is the section that gets into that, American savior logic, savior mindset of I'm going to save and solve. How do you embody that compassionate curiosity? You'd mentioned seeing them as people first, but what else does that look like?
I think it's, just remembering that they're people and having conversations about things that aren't pertinent to yourself or your work. It's just like, who is this person as a person, not even as a student, but, can you develop a real relationship with them outside of, what is their relationship in that hierarchy to you? Just like we're both people, we live in the same city. Have you been to this place? What are you doing this weekend? That kind of thing. So you can build this relationship so that they can see you as a person as well. And then they may be more willing to open up to you about things beyond just what's going on in the workplace or just what's going on in the classroom. Uh, so it's not even really being friends with the students if you need to keep that, that professional boundary, but just be a person with them. Just show them that you're human as well so that they can, let their guard down too.
I want to add to that really quickly because it ties into something that came to my mind and something that I don't always think about. And it's a good practice to have, but it's like they're going to be students for a period of time, but they're always going to be human beings. And so, however they are as students and however we can do to support them can be something in that present moment and something that would carry throughout their 4 or 6 years, however long they tend to be here. But, getting to know them within their own communities and them being a part of our own group. Because, they'll also get older, and if you're anything like Lamar, you'll probably end up finding a full-time job here on campus, and we'll see you and we'll work with you. But if they go off to bigger cities, if they go off and become like an astronaut or something big, then at least we can feel like we did our part in kind of alleviating some of that.
I love that. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I've got like half the page underlined in red because it's all just so good, and I'm like, how do we pivot to the next section here? Yeah, I think well, I'll come back to this part later. So moving on, the next section was and the author kind of went back to chapters like 1 and 2 and talking about developing knowledge, but I'm going to restate that quote and that I mentioned in the introduction and overview. Often I think it is less about administrators and faculty intentionally trying to invalidate a student's experience as much as not having the tools to understand what is happening. Or perhaps it happens because faculty and administrators are stretched too thin and have to move quickly as a result. So I read that and I'm like, yeah, like I don't think I ever intentionally go into interaction with a student and try and make their day worse. But I do have days where I'm busy and I have that window of space of grace and compassion is pretty narrow. I don't have as much it's not instinctual on some days as it is on others. Um, what do we do? What do we do about it? How do we change the culture? How do we create an environment where we have more of a capacity to um, respond well? And how do we create and give our staffs the tools and knowledge um, to move forward?
I think it could be, we could approach it the way as if we're learning how to ride a bike. I know it sounds weird, but when you are trying to learn these types of trauma-informed practices, you have to actually practice it. And you have to be prepared to communicate and interact with these students and know that maybe your first go around, you're not going to be quite sure what to say and what to do, and that's okay. But it won't hurt if you kind of develop that practice over time, because then you'll bring awareness to everyone else who may be on the fence about learning how to implement these practices. And it'll kind of normalize, like, oh, I am in student affairs, so that level of practice should be way up here. Versus like if you're in the registrar office where you're just behind, I don't want to assume, but you're kind of like in the office most of the time. Like your level of trauma-informed practice would probably be in the midpoint or even a little bit lower, but still, like having that development is really crucial.
The author talks, I mean, it's pretty intuitive, and you read it and you're just like, yeah, this makes sense. I see the ways of being as necessary starting points that we can use as scaffolds to help support additional tools. The next step involved is developing some knowledge and skills to attach to that scaffold. I want to emphasize that -ing part of developing that I just named. The work is active and ongoing. And you're like, yeah, this makes sense. Like having these conversations, having these book club discussions, having these webinars. Um, I was this morning preparing, I was writing, going through my notes and going back and watching the discussions from chapter 1 and chapter 2 to prepare for this discussion today. And my supervisor came in and was like, "Oh, what are you doing?" "Oh, I'm reading this book and preparing my notes." And it almost came as a surprise of like, how can that be the norm though? That we are like part of our workday or part of our work week is if it's active and ongoing, how can we better embody that as part of our, other than the occasional once a month or once every other month book club discussion? How can we embody that as part of what we do? Um, yeah, as part of our active and ongoing work. So, um, okay, this part gets into this is, I think, the part I really enjoyed because the author talked about our Genesis story. So we've got 16 minutes left of the hour. I don't want to be mindful of y'all's time, but um, does anybody want to share their Genesis story? How did you get into this work? Why did you get into this work? Marla's got a big smile on her face of like, do I share my story or not?
I wanted to stay in education, but I needed to take a step back from the classroom, um, because it affects you, and it can affect, especially if, you have certain trauma and your students have certain trauma, and you're all just sort of trying to deal with each other's trauma, and that goes on for like 20 years. You have to step back. And so yeah, that's kind of, I wanted to stay in education. I wanted to stay connected to what's going on. And what's happened is the this position with student support is sort of like the parts of my teaching job that I love the most.
Hmm.
I've really liked working with those kids that were, about to drown. Give me a kid that needs intervention, Oh my gosh. Yeah. Love that. Let me work with them. And so you do feel like you have an impact still, and like a broader impact, not so personal and all of that, but um, a little sanity saving too.
Anybody else want to share their story of how they got into this work?
Sure. I was one of the students that actually talked about where if you work at the school or you go to the school long enough, they eventually just give you an office.
You felt called out.
Um, so I was a undergrad here and I worked here as a student worker, as a tutor. And then I left and tutored at another school and then came back and did my grad work and worked as a teaching assistant while still tutoring at this school and the other school I was at. And, eventually just like, oh, well, you know a whole lot about tutoring. Like, yeah, I've done it for 8 years. And like, okay, well, then you should be the tutoring specialist. And like, okay, so that's the job I have now, where it's just I was always the person when I was a student in the class who was just like, oh, I can help you with this. And I think when you have that mindset of like, oh, I can help you with this, or I'm willing to learn how to do this so that I can help other people with it, you do have to be trauma informed because if you are known on campus for like, oh, this person is going to be able to help you with this. I mean, I talk to the tutors about this all the time. It's just like the students will learn that you are trustworthy and helpful, and they will ask you to help with other things that maybe you can't help with, and this is what you can do in those situations. Uh, so if you have a reputation of knowing what to do and actually listening to the students and trying your best to find solutions for them or at least listen, then it means that you need to have this trauma information so that, because this is one of the things that people will talk to you about.
Yeah, whether it's your job description or not, it's like you're there and you're that person, and it's like, you're safe. Let me just tell you all these things that you might not even be prepared for right now. Um, yeah, the author says, I mean, I just succinctly, at the root of many of our stories is the desire to support students, right? Um, my strike. I was a management undergrad. I worked in sales for the better part of 5 years, and I got tired of like hitting quotas. And I was like, I got to do something more with the hours and minutes of my day. And I think it goes back to that. I wanted to be on a college campus. You know, that's where I figured out who I was and who I wasn't, and kind of what I wanted to do. And I still didn't have it all figured out. And I wanted to be on a college campus to let students know, like, you're not married to your major, and it's okay if you don't have it all figured out. Like, but a desire to support students, I think, is the line that runs through all of our stories. And so, but we get into the heavy part of it of vicarious trauma and secondary traumatic stress and trauma exposure response and just the heaviness of that work. Of yeah, your role might be in tutoring, but a student decides to tell you about a traumatic experience or let you in on part of their life that's underpinning kind of who they are and who they're becoming. Um, it's taxing spiritually, physically, emotionally. So how do I mean, we can get into what the author suggests and gives us, but how do y'all take care of yourselves while also having a full cup to take care of our students?
I I remind my tutors that if someone has decided to open up to us about something that they are not required to, whether this is like grades or something personal or something traumatic, like remember that this is a privilege, that someone has seen you as trustworthy enough to share something deeply personal. So, like, yes, this is hard to hear, but it also means that this person trusts you enough that they have chosen you to be the person to hear it. So, you can have this moment of like, okay, this means that I'm doing my job well. And if nothing else, that's going to help you, have the confidence of like, okay, I can at least listen to this. I don't have to try to find the solutions. I don't have to try to, fix whatever this is. They know I'm a good listener, which is why they're telling me. So then just to be there and to be the good listener and let the student who's talking to you lead the interaction like we do with all of the tutoring sessions. Just what are they wanting to talk about? What are they wanting to share? And just listening to it. And then if the tutors have any problems or if they have any concerns, they need to talk to me as their supervisor. They don't have to have all the answers, and I don't either, but I do have more of that experience. So letting the tutors and the students know that, you know, I am also a listener. They can also come and talk to me.
Yeah, man, time is flying. This hour is flying by. We've got 9 minutes left. So, um, the part that really resonated with me, and it's something conversation that I'm having in my office with my students, mostly because the students are initiating the conversation and kind of matching that with some observations. But um, the author gets at this tension between self-care, but how we can't just require people to go do yoga and know good breathing practices and like to go for a walk while still having institutional structures and cultures that don't allow or support that. So for us, our student activities board in the past has done tons of events each semester, and um, the norm has been kind of maxing out their hours that they can work, volunteering the hours that they can't log on their timesheet, and like being completely empty and then going to class the next day. And um, yeah, me as the staff person supporting and saying, you don't, one, you shouldn't be working hours that you're not getting paid for if you're an employee. And two, maybe we need to scale back like the amount that we're doing to allow students to have that space, right? To have space to breathe, to have the flexibility to focus more on studying this week and not having to work all of their hours. And so um, it's an ongoing conversation that we're having, but I want to know about y'all. Like, do you all feel that it's done well? How have you, what kind of conversations are you all having? Um, to not, yeah, I like to be mindful because this is recorded and on YouTube. I don't want you to like throw your employer under the bus, but I think it's an important conversation. And the author mentioned how, yeah, the old status quo, we're getting more confident as a society and like talking about that and maybe moving away from the old status quo towards healthier boundaries within work. So yeah, what are y'all's, I guess, thoughts on that?
Yeah, it really does come back to managing expectations, I feel like. Um, we try to think that we can power through some days, and then others, when we do have the energy to do it, we can take care of everything on our checklist, if you will. And then, but on the like emotionally and mentally, there are things happening outside of work that you have to save up for. And when you go home or when you go and do what you do outside of work, you have to kind of prep yourself. And throughout the week, there are days where you're going to be at your best. And then there are days where it's like, hey, I'm going to get XYZ done, but I'm still doing the best I can. And it may just be that, like, at that higher level of leadership, I always try to anticipate that we're we're not inherently being lazy in some instances, especially when we're in a profession where we do come across students who need trauma-informed support. And so when those moments happen, yes, like that, like you said, it's taxing. And so if you're already kind of experiencing trauma yourself in your respective position, that adds on to more things. So I think just being more mindful of there are things we can get done throughout the week, and it doesn't always have to be in one go. And we don't always have to be at 100 every single day.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder of like you can show up wherever you're at as best you can. Um, okay, we've got a handful of minutes left. So we're gonna have to skip through some of this, but the author offers some strategies for self-care, gives some really good guidance on like breathing that I use as someone with uh, anxiety that I experience every day and choose to be unmedicated. Reconnecting with your body. So much good stuff in here. But I'll kind of pose these questions mostly for anyone watching on YouTube, but for y'all. But they give Scott uh, 5 self-care buckets. So physical, are you getting enough sleep? Is your diet supporting your body well? Are you getting enough exercise? Social, are you getting enough face-to-face time with friends and family? How are you nurturing your relationship with friends and family? Mental, are you engaged in enough activities that mentally stimulate you? How are you proactively supporting your mental health? Number 4, spiritual, are you engaging in spiritual practices that you find fulfilling? What questions do you ask yourself about life and experience? And then the 5th bucket I give is emotional. Do you have healthy ways to process your emotions? Do you incorporate activities into your life that help you feel recharged? And then I don't mean to exclude residence life, folks, but the SOS self-care, as someone who did a 10-week practicum in residence life and said that's enough residence life for me, of 3 a.m. on call. Um, some really helpful stuff in there, but yeah, the author concludes with this section on just pushing our systems and everything we do towards wellness-centered decision making. Um, mentions saying no to opportunities at work and not as acts of defiance, but acts of love, of setting boundaries and saying no to extra things. I joke that the reward for work, good work is often more work. And it's kind of a sad but true thing sometimes. But yeah, saying no. Like it's okay to say no to extra opportunities. And the author concludes with these may all seem like small efforts that don't change organizational culture, but of course, organizations are made up of individuals. And the more of us who keep insisting on working in ways that support wellness, the closer we get to a tipping point of that becoming our new status quo. So, as we wrap up, what are some nuggets that you all are taking with you as individuals in a collective culture that you'll challenge yourself to changing that status quo? What are you taking with you?
I mean, I think pretty much everything we talked about today are things I can take with me. You know, there are some perspectives I got from this conversation or book discussion that I can implement now, or I can just kind of put it in my mind and think when the time comes, like this would be a really good practice to do.
I think for me, just remembering what Delana and I and pretty much all of us talk about, just that these students are humans first, and making sure that we pour into them all, like in all aspects, and not just focus on the things that directly affect us, because we are in student affairs, so we need to make sure that they're good as a whole, and just being mindful about how we speak to them and how we interact with them.
Yeah. Excuse me. Anybody else last thoughts?
I would say to use your sick and vacation time. It's there for a reason. If you need a day off, I mean, like mental health is still part of physical health, and it's okay to take those days and do what you need to do for yourself. And that the student workers will probably need to do that as well. So if someone sends you an email and just like, "Oh, I really can't come into work today," and they give some sort of vague reason, like they're probably not saying something to you that still tells you what you need to know. And, you know, you can either say, yes, okay, you can't come in today and give them that grace and give them that time, or you can say, no, I really need you to come in and have this student who is like a student worker, like as their fifth priority, say, like, oh, well, let me think about what my priorities are and what I need, and then potentially have them not continue working with us, or for them to be like, well, actually, I do have to take this day off and, no show something. So remembering that, you know, just because it's a work week doesn't mean that you don't have bad days on those days too.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. I, until this job, had not used my sick days just for mental health or because I need to recharge. And I've started doing that on like a Friday, just take a Friday off, not because I'm actually sick, but because I need an extra day to recharge and as an act of love, as the author puts it. So, um, thanks everyone for joining. This went really quick. There was a lot in this chapter. I almost feel like we need like a part two. Probably should have broken it into two parts, but that's okay. Yeah, I appreciate everyone joining, and we'll meet on January. It's the second Wednesday in January, the 14th, I believe, to cover supporting students, chapter 5, supporting students who have experienced trauma. So, Hilda, thanks for the opportunity to facilitate today. I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Thanks, Josh. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'd also like to thank Josh again for serving as our discussion facilitator. As we close today, I have a few reminders. For those participating today, these links will be in the chat. If you're watching the recording, these links will be in the description. Visit our YouTube channel for our webinar recordings. This recording will be also on our channel as soon as it is made available. If you missed a previous webinar Wednesday, you can find that recording also on our YouTube channel. If you're interested in presenting or serving as a panelist or facilitating a discussion for a future webinar Wednesday, please complete the proposal form. Additionally, the TACUSPA membership year runs from January to December. If you're not yet a member of TACUSPA, we encourage you to join us. Finally, we're really excited as the webinars committee to announce our January lineup. On January the 7th, we will have a leadership interview premiere on our YouTube channel. On January 14th, as Josh mentioned, we will meet again as our book club to discuss chapter 5. And on January 21st, we'll also have another pre-recorded YouTube video. This one will be the premiere of our discussion of an article published in 2024 in Student Affairs on Campus, TACUSPA's peer-reviewed journal, Living in the Ivory Tower, Stress and Coping Among Live-In Residence Life Professionals. So you heard Josh mention work-life balance for residence life professionals. And so we do have a discussion on that on the 21st. Thank you so much for your time today and have a great day.